All right, everyone, welcome to the next video where we will talk on encrypted cardholder data and an impact on PCI DSS scope for third-party service provider. First, we can abbreviate as TPSP, are entities that provide, as of now, we've discussed already, services on behalf of a business, which they might be able to store, they might process, or they might transmit the cardholder data. And when those services providers, when these service providers only store encrypted cardholder, remember, if they are storing the encrypted cardholder data, of course, they do not have the means of decrypting that data, then they can be out scope, but that doesn't mean that they can be totally out scope. PCI DSS might still be included under certain conditions, like some controls like physical control or access control that they need to implement, because it makes sense, and we're going to see that shortly. If they can always store the encrypted data, but it has nothing to do with the management of the key, by the time it gets to them, the data is encrypted. Maybe it's a cloud storage. They just store the encrypted data. They do not even have the key to be able to decrypt the data. At that point, why would they really want to be like fully in scope and make sure they're being compliant with PCI DSS? But that does not in totality just eliminate them from being or adhering to certain standard or requirements. As I said, they might also have some physical controls or setting controls that will help them to also meet the PCI DSS compliance. For example, say a third-party service provider provides cloud storage services and receive encrypted payment data from a merchant, but does not have access to the encryption keys. So what happened? We'll see right there. Discretion access determine the scope. Encryption alone, if the cardholder data is encrypted by another entity, such as the merchant, Walmart, for example, and the third party, or it can be USD as cool. Let's say this is something we're doing. No, we are transferring the rates 100%. We are not like finally doing anything that, all that we are not accepting any form of payment that can increase our security rates. So had it been said, this is something that we do, and we want to house, when we collect that payment or the transaction, we manage the key. We have a server that we do manage. We take care of everything, but we want to outsource that, have a cloud storage. We don't have enough storage. Then we are outsourcing it to a third-party provider to be able to just store the encrypted information. That's just exactly what we are discussing here, right? Does not have access to the decryption key, then the third-party service provider cannot decrypt the data, because if it's encrypted, we all know what encryption looks like. You have like crazy or random characters. That's if you an unauthorized user, even that service provider, the fact that they are able to have that data is useless to them, because then themselves cannot decrypt it. They cannot read from that particular data, right? And he said then the TPSP cannot decrypt the data and is limited in its ability to process sensitive information. But let's look at a key point. Data encryption alone does not automatically make the entire environment exempt from PCI DSS requirements, but not being able to decrypt the data can reduce the scope, since third-party vendor rigs or third-party service provider cannot manipulate or even use that sensitive data, you see. And that's why I said that even though it's in their keeping, still it is useless. But the fact that it's useless doesn't mean that they're just going to keep it there where anybody can just get access to the encrypted data. No, they also need to apply some security measures. That's why I said PCI DSS might still apply, where they'll be able to apply or implement certain controls to make sure that they better protect the encrypted data that they have in their keeping. But let's look at some of the responsibility of data protection and shared responsibility that we're going to talk. Even though the third-party service providers store encrypted cardholder data, the responsibility for securing the data, such as the key management and the decryption, often remains with the entity that owns the data. For example, say USD, that is a merchant, or even a business that encrypted the data, right? So the TCPS is only, the TPSP is only responsible for controlling access to the storage media, not the actual encryption of the data. You see, you control, so that we'll talk about physical controls, access control. Who is supposed to have access to that encrypted data? So that's their own part. That's what they're going to do, right? If a merchant sends encrypted payment information to a cloud service provider for storage, the cloud provider does not have access to the encryption keys. The cloud provider's PCI DSS scope might be reduced to only managing physical security of the data storage without having to meet the full PCI DSS requirement that applies to the decryption system. I hope that covered. But let's see some of the conditions for reduced scope. First, no access to decryption keys, as we have discussed. The third-party service provider must not have the ability to decrypt the cardholder data, and it must not perform key management function. You cannot even manage a key. If you are always storing the data, you don't know how they are encrypting the data, how they are managing the data, your job is just to store the data. Then you want to make sure you have like the rightful access, and that definitely reduces the scope of PCI DSS. Talking about encryption key management, if the third-party service provider does not have the ability to manage or access encryption keys, it cannot decrypt the data either, reducing its responsibility for protecting the data confidentiality or no direct impact on data security. Since the third-party service provider cannot access or decrypt the cardholder data, it does not impact the confidentiality or security of the sensitive data in a way that requires full PCI DSS compliance for the data itself. I hope this covered. And of course, in the course of doing that, then you would want to also prevent unauthorized access. And that's why it says that even though they might not, or though the third-party service provider might have a reduced scope, they must still ensure the encrypted data is protected through physical and logical access controls, not just the physical aspect, logical also. We're supposed to have logical access to that encrypted stored data, right? For example, the cloud provider must still implement strong access control measures to ensure only authorized individuals or system can access the encrypted data, right? And with that, we also talk about documentation of responsibility. Both parties, being the third-party service provider and the owner of that data, the person that owns the data, must have a clear documentation with their respective roles and responsibility in securing the data, and to tell me what am I supposed to do to be in compliance with PCI DSS, most importantly, to secure and protect cardholder data. And that's why it says that ensure proper data protection policies, encryption key management procedure are in place. Do we have this document? Do I know my roles and responsibility? What am I supposed to be doing? You know, because yes, we are talking about two people who go to an agreement. Again, I need to know what I'm going to be doing, right? Likewise, so this literally explains that. For example, of a reduced scope for third party, say a merchant encrypt cardholder data before sending it to a third-party cloud storage provider for long-term storage. The third party always stores the encrypted data and does not have access to the encrypted key or encryption keys. The merchant retains control over encryption and decryption as well as key management. What's the impact on PCI DSS scope? The third-party service provider PCI DSS scope is reduced because they do not have access to the decryption keys or the ability to decrypt the cardholder data. Do you see? The merchant is still responsible for securing the decryption keys and ensuring that only authorized personnel can access them. And this literally explains all what we'll be discussing. You see, the third-party service provider to have the physical access control, storage security, but yes, they are in charge in storing or housing the encrypted cardholder data, but the merchant actually manages the data, manage the key. The merchant is the one that will encrypt and as well as decrypt the data, right? So with this, I think I'll just also want to go about key management encryption in PCI DSS. I think this video has been going for a long time. So I'm going to stop this and then we'll continue with the next video, okay? And do not forget to share and like our videos. Bye.